Welcome, Wapham crew, and new listeners. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a Rocky Mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, December 18th, Monday, December 19th. For those of you across the pond and beyond, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I am your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live tonight from the Mile High Clubhouse. I'm so glad you can join us on one of our pre-holiday weekends. Next weekend, it's Christmas. Christmas. Are you guys ready? Are you prepared? I totally am not. I still have to decorate my tree. It's been a crazy year. But we got the tree up, it flickers, it dances, it does whatnot. It even plays music. It is pretty spendy, but I'd rather do that than cut down a poor tree every year. That would just make me feel terrible, although I do love the smell. It's so delightful. So if you're listening to us live right now, you may be listening to us on a KPNL radio, which you can find at KPNL radio at kpnl-db.com. You may also be listening to us live on Spreaker under We Are Paradox Media. You can also find us on your free time, whether you're working it, or working out. Spreaker. And don't forget, it's We Are Paradox Media. So Spreaker, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Facebook, Castbox, Tumblr, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser, and Podvine. If you don't mind, please mosey on over to our YouTube under We Are Paradox Media. Please subscribe, like any video that you've listened to or watched, and leave us any comments below. Don't forget to include any guests that you would like us to try to have on the show. So tonight, unfortunately, Richard got the flu. Richard, I hope you're feeling better soon. That stuff's really been going around. It's been a pretty crazy year. My daughter, my oldest, and her poor little baby, my little grandson, Chichanka, they're both sick. But according to her, it was just like, for her, at least, only a 24-hour bug. So hopefully the baby feels better soon as well. And yes, he's even got some teeth coming in at the same time. So it's pretty sad. Hello, Jason. So yeah, we're also doing live videos now on Facebook. Tonight I am hiding behind the scenes. Let's see, I might flick it on for a minute. Because I did get ready, but then come to find out that Chris, his power went out, so wah. Not fun at all. Power's out, there's the flu, there's all kinds of stuff going on. It's insane. There's insanity running amok. Oh, I forgot something down here. What the heck? Let's see, where did it go? So tonight, instead of having Memphis Empath Paranormal on this evening, we're going to be doing story time. I love story time. Here, let me grab my flashlight. I am not finding what I'm looking for down here. Hello? Anybody home? Alright, there we go. So I'm all elfed up. I got my pendulum. Not pendulum. What do they call those things on the Ouija board? Oh, I can't think. Brain fart. I have all the timers. Alright, so let's see. I need to start my story time music. Makes it creep, yeah. Creepy Crepes. Turn it down a smidge. Making an even 56. So this is Real Hauntings. True American Ghost Stories by Hans Holscher. Actually inherited this book from my grandpa Frank, aka Grandpa Cookie. Thank you, Grandpa Cookie, for the awesome book. I've really been digging it so far. It's been awesome. After we read through this, during the third hour, we'll be doing Reddit ghost stories. But yes, let's away, shall we? The Ghost on Cape Cod. Some of the best leads regarding a good ghost story come to me as the result of my having appeared on one of many television or radio programs, usually discussing a book dealing with the subject matter for which I am best known, psychic phenomena, of one kind or another. So it happened that one of my many appearances on the Bob Kennedy television show in Boston drew unusually heavy mail from other New England states and even New York. Now, if there is one thing ghosts don't really care much about, it is time. To them, everything is suspended in a timeless dimension, where the intensity of their suffering or problem remains forever constant and alive. After all, they are unable to let go of what it is that ties them to a specific location. Otherwise, they would not be what we so commonly and perhaps a little callously call ghosts. I am mentioning this as a way of explaining why sometimes I cannot respond as quickly as I would like to when someone among the living reports a case of a haunting that needs to be looked into. Reasons were and are now mainly lack of time, but more lack of funds to organize a team and go after the case. Still, by and large, I do manage to show up in time and usually manage to resolve the situation. Thus it happened that I received a letter dated August 4th, 1966, sent to me via station WBZ-TV in Boston from the owner of Captain Gray's Smorgasbord, an inn located in Barnstable in Cape Cod. The owner, Mr. Leonard Svensson, had seen me on the show and asked me to get in touch. We've had many unusual happenings here. The building in which our restaurant and guest house is located was built in 1716 and was formerly a sea captain's residence, Svensson wrote. I am a sucker for sea captains haunting their old houses, so I wrote back asking for details. Mr. Svensson replied a few weeks later, pleased to have aroused my interest. Both he and his wife had seen the apparition of a young woman, and their eldest son had also felt an unseen presence. Guests in their rooms also mentioned unusual happenings. It appeared that when the house was first built, the foundation had been meant as a fortification against Indian attacks. Rumor has it, Mr. Svensson informed me that the late sea captain had been a slave trader and sold slaves on the premises. Svensson and his wife, both of Swedish origin, had lived on Cape in the early 30s, and later moved back to Sweden to return in 1947. After a stint working in various restaurants in New York, they acquired the inn on Cape Cod. I decided a trip to the Cape was in order. I asked Sybil Leek to accompany me as the medium. Mr. Svensson exclaimed that the inn would close in October for the winter, but he, and perhaps other witnesses to the phenomenon, could be seen even after that date. Should I wish to come up then, but it was not until June 1967, that following year, that I finally managed to get our act together, so to speak, and I contacted Mr. Svensson to set a date for our visit. Unfortunately, he had since sold the inn, and, as he put it, the new owner was not as interested in the ghost as he was. So there was no way for him to arrange for our visit now. But Mr. Svensson did not realize how stubborn I can be when I want to do something. I never gave up on this case and decided to wait a little and then approach the new owners. Before I could do so, however, the new owner saw fit to get in touch with me instead. He referred to the correspondence between Mr. Svensson and me and explained that at the time I had wanted to come up, he had been in the process of redoing the inn for its opening. That having taken place several weeks ago, it would appear that we have experienced evidence of the spirit on several occasions, and now feel we should look into this matter as soon as possible. He invited us to come on up whenever it was convenient, preferably yesterday. The new owner turned out to be an attorney named Jack Furman of Hyannis, a very personable man. When I wrote, we would indeed be pleased to meet him, and the ghost, or ghosts, as the case might be, he sent us all sorts of information regarding flights and offered to pick us up at the airport. Mr. Furman was not shy in reporting his own experiences since he had taken over the house. There has been on one occasion an umbrella mysteriously stuck into the stairwell in an open position. This was observed by my employee Thaddeus by Ozenbeck. On another occasion, when the inn was closed in the evening early, my manager returned to find the front door bolted from inside, which appeared strange since no one was in the building. At another time, my chef observed that the heating plant went off at 2:30, and the serviceman, whom I'd called the next day, found that a fuse was removed from the fuse box. 2:30 in the morning, obviously no one that we know of was up and around to do this. In addition, noises during the night have been heard by occupants of the inn. I suggested in my reply that our little team consisted, as it would, of medium and writer Sybil Leek, Catherine, my ex-wife, and myself should spend the night at the inn as good ghost hunters do. I also requested that the former owner, Mr. Svensson, be present for further questioning as well as any direct witnesses to the phenomena. On the other hand, I delicately suggested that no one not connected with the case should be present, keeping in mind some occasions where my investigations had been turned into entertainment by my host to amuse and astound neighbors and friends. In the end, it turned out to be best to come by car, as we had other projects to look into en route. The date for our visit was to be August 17th, 1967, a year and 2 weeks after the case first came to my attention, but not much of a time lag, the way it is with ghosts. When we arrived at the inn, after a long and dusty journey, the sight that greeted us was well worth the trip. There, set back from a quiet country road, amid tall, aged trees, sat an impeccable white colonial house, 2 stories high, with an attic nicely surrounded by a picket fence, and an old bronze and iron lamp at the corner. The windows all had their wooden shutters open to the outside, and the place presented such a picture of peace it was difficult to realize that we had come here to confront a disturbance. The house was empty, as we soon realized, because the new owner had not yet allowed guests to return, considering what the problems were. Quickly, we unburdened ourselves of our luggage, each taking a room upstairs, then returning to the front of the house to begin our usual inspection. Sybil Leek now let go of her conscious self, the more to immerse herself in the atmosphere and potential presence of the place. There is something in the bedroom. In the attic, Sybil said immediately as we climbed the winding stairs. I thought just now someone was pushing my hair up from the back, she added. Mr. Furman had, of course, come along for the investigation. At this point, we all saw a flash of light in the middle of the room. None of us was frightened by it, not even the lawyer, who by now had taken the presence of the supernatural in his house in his stride. When we proceeded downstairs again, with Sybil assuring us that whatever it was that perturbed her up in the attic did not seem to be present downstairs. With that, we came to a locked door, a door that Mr. Furman assured us that had not been opened in a long time. When we managed to get it open, it led us to the downstairs office, or the room now used as such. Catherine, ever the alert artist and designer that she was, noticed that a door had been barred from the inside, almost as if someone had once been kept in that little room. Where did this particular door lead to? I asked Mr. Furman. It appeared it led to a narrow corridor and finally came out into the fireplace in a large main room. Someone told me if I ever dug up the fireplace, Mr. Furman intoned significantly, I might find myself. I might find something. What that something would be was left to our imagination. Mr. Furman added that his information and informant had been hinted at some sort of valuables, but Sybil immediately added, bodies. You may find bodies. She described physically many people suffering in the house and a secret way out of the house, possibly from the captain's slave trading days. Like a doctor examining a patient, I then inspected the walls, both in the little room and the main room, and found many hollow spots. A bookcase turned out to be a false front. Hidden passages seemed to be suggesting themselves. Quite obviously, Mr. Furman was not about to tear open the walls to find them, but Sybil was right. The house was honeycombed with areas not visible to the casual observer. Sybil insisted we seat ourselves around the fireplace, and I insisted that the ghost, if any, should contact us there rather than our trying to chase the elusive phantom from room to room. A way out of the house is very important, Sybil said, and I couldn't help visualizing the unfortunate slaves, the good or not so good captain, held captive in this place way back when. But when nothing much happened, we went back to the office, where I discovered the front portion of the wall seemed to block off another room beyond it, not accounted for when measuring the outside walls. When we managed to pry it open, we found a stairwell, narrow though it was, where apparently a flight of stairs had once been. I asked for a flashlight. Catherine shone it up the shaft. We found ourselves below a toilet in an upstairs bathroom. No ghost here. We sat down again, and I invited the presence, whomever it was, to manifest immediately. Sybil remarked she felt a young boy around the place, 150 years ago. As she went more and more into a trance state, Sybil mentioned the name Chet, someone who wanted to be saved from an enemy, Carson. Let him speak, I said. Carson, 1858, Sybil replied, now almost totally entranced as I listened carefully for words coming from her in halting fashion. I will fight. Charles, the child is missing. Whom will you fight? Who took the child? I asked and returned. Chicopee. Child is dead. Whose house is this? Fort. Whose is it? Carson. Are you Carson? Captain Carson. What regiment? Belvedere. Cavalry. 9th. Where is the regiment stationed? There was no reply. Who commanded the regiment? I insisted. Wainwright. Edward Wainwright, commander. How long have you been here? 4 years. Where were you born? Montgomery, Massachusetts. How old are you now? There was no reply. Are you married? My son, Tom, 10. What year was he born in? 47. Your wife's name? Gina. What church do you go to? I don't go. What church do you belong to? She is of Scottish background. Scottish, Kirk. Where is the Kirk located? 6 miles. What is the name of this village we are in now? Chicopee. Further questioning gave us this information, that the enemy had taken his boy, and the enemy were the Iroquois. This was fort, and he was to defend it. I then began, as I usually do when exorcism is called for, to speak of the passage of time and the need to realize that the entity communicating through the medium was aware of the true situation in this respect. Did Captain Carson realize that time had passed since the boy had disappeared? Oh yes, he replied, 4 years. No, 107 years, I replied. Once again I established that he was Captain Carson, and there was a river nearby, and Iroquois were the enemy. Was he aware that there were others here besides himself? He did not understand this. Would he want me to help him find his son, since they had both passed over and should be able to find each other? I need permission from Wainwright. As I often do in such cases, I pretended to speak for Wainwright and granted him the permission. A ghost, after all, is not a rational human being, but an entity existing in a delusion where only emotions count. Are you now ready to look for your son? I am ready. Then I will send a messenger to help you find him, I said, but you must call out to your son in a loud voice. The need to reach out to a loved one is of cardinal importance in the release of a trapped spirit commonly called a ghost. John Carson is dead, but not dead forever, he said in a faint voice. You lived here in 1858, but this is 1967, I reminded him. Are you mad? No, I'm not mad. Touch your forehead. You will see this is not the body you are accustomed to. We have lent you a body to communicate with us, but it is not yours. Evidently touching a woman's head did jolt the entity from his beliefs. I decided to press on. Go from this house and join your loved ones. Go, await you on the other side. A moment later, Captain Carson had slipped away, and a sleepy Sybil Leek opened her eyes. I now turned to Mr. Furman, who had watched the proceedings with mounting fascination. Could he corroborate any of the information that had come to us through the entranced medium? This house was built on the foundations of an Indian fort, he confirmed, to defend the settlers against the Indians. Were there any Indians here in 1858? There are Indians here even now, Furman replied. We have an Indian reservation at Mashpee, near here, on Martha's Vineyard. There is a tribal chief and quite a large Indian population. He also confirmed having once seen a sign in the western part of Massachusetts that read Montgomery, the place Captain Carson had claimed as his birthplace. Also that a Wainwright family was known to have lived in an area not far from where we were now. However, Mr. Furman had no idea of any military personnel by that name. Sybil mentioned a river in connection with this house, Furman said, and yes, there is a river running through the house. It is still here. Earlier, Sybil had drawn a rough map of the house as it was in the past. From her psychic viewpoint, a house surrounded by a high fence. Mr. Furman pronounced the drawing amazingly accurate, especially as Sybil had not set foot on the property or known about it until our actual arrival. My former secretary, Carol E. Howes, and her family occupied this house, Mr. Furman explained, when I turned my attention to the manifestations themselves. They operated this house as an inn 20 years ago, and often had unusual things happen here as she grew up, but it did not seem to bother them. Then the house passed into the hands of Mrs. Nielsen. Then Mr. Svensson took over. He did not speak of the phenomenon until about a year and a half ago. The winter of 1965, he was shingling the roof, and he was just coming in from the roof on the second-floor balcony on a cold day. He had left the window ajar and secured when suddenly he heard the window sash come down. He turned around. On the second-floor platform, he saw the young girl, her hair windswept behind her. She was wearing white. He could not see anything below the waist, and he confronted her for a short period, but could not bring himself to talk, and she went away. His wife was in the kitchen some time later in the afternoon when she felt the presence of someone in the room. She turned around and saw an older man dressed in black at the other end of the kitchen. She ran out of the kitchen and never went back in again. The accountant, John Dillon's son, was working in the kitchen one evening around 10. Now some of these heavy pots were hanging there on pegs from the ceiling. Young Dillon told his father 2 of them lifted themselves up from the ceiling, unhooked themselves from the pegs, and came down on the floor. Did any guests staying at the inn during Svensson's ownership complain of any unusual happenings, I asked. There was this young couple staying in what Mr. Svensson called the honeymoon suite. Mr. Furman replied. 6:30 in the morning, the couple heard 3 knocks at the door. 3 loud, distinct knocks, and when they opened the door, there was no one there. This sort of thing had happened before. Another case involved a lone diner who complained to Svensson that someone was pushing him from his chair at the end of the table in the dining room onto another chair. But since he did not see another person, how could this be? Svensson hastily had explained that the floor was a bit rickety, and that was probably the cause. Furman then recounted the matter of the lock. He and a young man who worked with him had left the inn to bring the chef, who had become somewhat difficult that day, home to his own place. When Mr. Furman's assistant returned to the inn at 2:30 in the morning, the door would not open and the key would not work. After he climbed into the house through an upstairs window, he found to his amazement that the door had been locked from the inside. The story gave me a chill. That very day after our arrival, nearly the same thing happened to us, except that we did not have to climb to the upper floor to get in, but managed to enter through a rear door. Surely, someone did not exactly want us in the house. The chef, by the way, had an experience of his own. The heating system is normally quite noisy, but one night it suddenly stopped and the heat went off. When the repair crew came the next day, they discovered that a fuse had been physically removed from the fuse box, which in turn stopped the heating system from operating. The house was securely locked at that time, so no one from the outside could have done this. The famous case of an umbrella being stuck into the ceiling of the upstairs hall was confirmed by the brother of the young man, Mr. Bookstein, living in the house. He also pointed out to us that the Chicopee Indians were indeed in this area, so Sybil's true trance utterances made a lot of sense. There was an Indian uprising in Massachusetts as late as the middle of the 19th century, he confirmed, giving more credence to the date, 1858, that had come through Sybil. Was the restless spirit of the captain satisfied with our coming? Did he and his son meet up in the great beyond? Whatever came of our visit, nothing further has been heard of any disturbances at Captain Gray's smorgasbord in Barnstable. Chapter 3. The Ship Chandler's Ghost of Cohasset. There are many haunted houses people can visit if they so desire. However, just as many of these houses used to have a ghost that was dealt with by people like me, whose work not only includes research and verification of events, also the morally obligatory task of setting the unfortunate ghost free of whatever kept him or her in the place to begin with. In some cases, an attempt may have been made to de-ghost a place, but for some reason, the manifestations are still evident. Naturally, the real ghost buff will prefer such places to ones where, at best, only the impression of past hauntings can be picked up. The following account is about a house that we tried to de-ghost and failed. Moving an old house from its original location to a new spot frequently awakens ghostly manifestations that may have been slumbering in it for a long time. Such was the case when the Historical Society of Cohasset, Massachusetts, moved the old ship's chandlery inland somewhat so that tourists could visit it more conveniently. About an hour's drive from Boston, Cohasset is a very old town that used to make its living mainly from the sea. When we arrived at the wooden structure in a corner of the post road, it had a nautical look, its 2 stories squarely set down as if to withstand any gale. We found several people already assembled. Among them were Mrs. E. Stoddard Marsh, the curator of the museum, which is what the ship's chandlery is now, and her associate, lean, quiet Robert Fraser. The others were friends and neighbors. We entered the building and walked around the downstairs portion, admiring its displays of nautical supplies ranging from fishing tackle and scrimshaw made from walrus teeth to heavy anchors, hoists, and rudders, all the instruments and wares of a ship chandler's business. Built in the late 18th century by Samuel Bates, the building was owned by the Bates family, notably by one John Bates, second of the family to have the place, who had died 78 years before our visit. Something of a local character, John Bates had cut a swath around the area as a gay blade. He could well afford the role, for he owned a fishing fleet of 24 vessels, and business was good in those far-off days when the New England coast was dotted with major parts for fishing and shipping. A handwritten record of his daily catch can be seen next to the mysterious closet full of ladies' clothes. Mr. Bates led a full life. I questioned Mrs. Marsh, the curator, about strange happenings in the house, especially after it was moved to its present site. 2 years ago, we were having a lecture here. There were about 40 people listening to Francis Haggerty talk about old sailing boats. I was sitting over here to the left on this ground floor with Robert Fraser, when all of a sudden we heard heavy footsteps upstairs and things being moved and dragged. So I said to Mr. Fraser, "Someone is up there. Will you please tell him to be quiet? I thought it was kids." There was a man who had helped them with the work at the museum who had lately stayed away for reasons unknown. Could he have heard the footsteps too, and decided that caution was the better part of valor? The other day, just recently, 4 of us went into the room this gentleman occupies when he is here, and the door closed on us by itself. It had never done that before. We decided to go upstairs now and see if Mr. Bates, or whoever the ghost might be, felt like walking for us. We quietly waited in the semi-darkness upstairs, near the area where the footsteps had been heard, but nothing happened. The steps went back and forth. Mrs. March reiterated, heavy, masculine steps, the kind a big man would make. A year after my visit to the ship's chandlery of Cohasset, nothing further was heard from the curators. Evidently, John Bates must have simmered down after all. If you happen to be up near Boston and feel like visiting the house at Cohasset, do so by all means. Maybe you will be luckier than I was, and John Bates will put in an appearance. Chapter 4. Young Erland and the Ghost of the Admiral. It is a known fact that children sometimes have ghostly encounters where adults cannot see or hear a thing. Perhaps this is so because young people are not yet conditioned to believe or disbelieve in things, and instead follow their own instincts more fully. In any event, the following case occurred when our chief witness was still very young. The Jacobson family was a lovely summer home in Whitfield. That's in New Hampshire. The house stands in a secluded part of the forest at the end of a narrow winding driveway lined by tall trees with a wooden porch surrounding it on 3 sides. The house itself rises up 3 stories and is painted white in the typical New England manner. The house was called Missin Top by its original owner and builder. I questioned Erland Jacobson, who was an instructor at Goddard College, about his experiences in the old house. When my parents decided to turn the attic into a club room where I could play with my friends, Jacobson began, they cut windows into the wall and threw out all the possessions of the former owner of the house they had found there. I was about 7 at the time. Soon after, footsteps and other noises began to be heard in the attic and along the corridor stairs leading toward it. But it wasn't until the summer of 1955 that I experienced my first really important disturbance. The summer we slept here for the first time in this room, 1 flight up, and almost nightly we were awakened by noises or could not sleep, waiting for them to begin. At first we thought they were animal noises, but they were too much like footsteps and heavy objects being moved across the floor, overhead, and down the hall. We were so scared we refused to move in our beds or turn down the lights. But I did not know of the tradition that the house was haunted. Did you not? I asked. Yes, I grew up with it. All I knew was what I had heard from my parents. The original owner and builder of the house, an admiral named Hawley, and his wife were both most difficult people. The admiral died in 1933, and in 1935, the house was sold to my parents by his daughter, who was then living in Washington. Anyone who happened to be trespassing on his territory would be chased off it, and I imagine he would not have liked our throwing out his sea chest and other personal possessions. Any other experience besides the footsteps? About 4 years ago, Erland Jacobson replied, my wife and I, and a neighbor, Shepherd Vogelsang, were sitting in the living room downstairs and discussing interpretations of the Bible. I needed a dictionary at one point in the discussion and got up to fetch it from upstairs. I ran up to the bin here in front of this room, and there were no lights on at the time. I opened the door to the club room and started to go up the stairs. Then suddenly I walked into what I can only describe as a warm, wet blanket. Something that touched me physically, as if it had been hung from wires in the corridor. I was very upset, backed out, and went downstairs. My wife took one look at me and said, "You're white." "I know," I said. "I think I just walked into the Admiral." "Has anyone else had an encounter with a ghost here?" I asked. Well, another house guest went up into the attic and came running down, reporting that the doorknob had turned in front of his very eyes before he could reach for it to open the door. The dog was with him and steadfastly refused to cross the threshold. Another house guest arrived very late at night about 5 years ago. We had already gone to bed, and he knew he had to sleep in the attic since every other room was already taken. Instead, I found him sleeping in the living room on the floor in the morning. He knew nothing about the ghosts. I'm not going to go back up there anymore, he vowed, and would not say anything further. I guess he must have run into the Admiral. Every member of the family had at one time or another had an encounter with the ghostly Admiral. Sybil Leek, my mediumistic friend, had come with us, and she was quickly able to pick up the vibrations of the unseen visitor. As soon as she had gone into a trance state, she made contact with the Admiral. She even had the right name, although she had not been present when I had spoken to the owners of the house earlier. It seemed that the Admiral had resented the new owners throwing out all of his things. He did not like that the house was sold. He would have preferred it went to his son. I implored the ghostly Admiral not to be upset with the family now living in the house, and he replied, in rather a stiff Navy manner, that he was a tidy person and would take care of himself. When we left Whitefield, it seems to me that the old sea dog must have felt a lot better. After all, how many New Yorkers would drive all the way up to New Hampshire to talk to him after all those years? Makes you wonder, don't it? Alright, so I'm going to check this sound really quick. Looks like it's going good. Yeah, bouncing over here. Indeed. Hope you guys are enjoying the story. Part 2, Ghosts in New York State. Chapter 5, A Staten Island Ghost. Some of the best reporters of ghostly experiences are young people, anywhere from age 10 on up. Teenagers between 12 and 18 are also particularly likely to actually experience some phenomenon, such as poltergeists or other ghostly manifestations, because of their physical energies. Such was the case in a certain old house in Staten Island, New York. I received a letter from Carolyn Westbow, whose aunt, Mrs. Carol Packer, had lived in a house on Staten Island where a poltergeist had also taken up residence. Poltergeists are ghosts who like to make noises or move objects around. Carolyn's aunt had since moved to upstate New York, so I asked the new owner of the house, a family by the name of Goats, for permission to visit. What I liked about Carolyn Westbow was the fact that she was 17 and very serious, was that she herself was doubtful about her experiences and wondered if they weren't all due to imagination or, as she put it, self-delusion. But deep down, she knew she was psychic and had already accepted this knowledge. "When was the last time you were at the house on Henderson Avenue, Carolyn?" I asked. "The last time I was at the house was in January of 1965, she answered. "My aunt was in the process of moving out, and the house was in an uproar. I stood against the wall and watched the proceedings. My left side was turned to the wall, and I was reminiscing about the wonderful times I had had on New Year's Eve. I somehow smiled to myself. All of a sudden, my right side, the right side of my head, felt very depressed, and a feeling of great despair came over me. I felt like wringing my hands and was very distraught. It only stayed with me a few moments, but I had the distinct feeling of a woman who was very worried. And I can also feel something or someone pressing against the right side of my head. And then I saw a mist in the large downstairs dining room of the house. A mist. What sort of mist? It had a shape rather tall and thin. It did not have a face and looked kind of ragged, but I did see hands wringing. Carolyn had told her aunt about her uncanny experience, even though she was afraid she would be laughed at. Her own family had pooh-poohed the whole thing, and Carolyn did not like to be laughed at, especially when she knew she had seen what she had seen. But her aunt did not laugh. She too had observed the mystery shape when she was alone in the house, yet she had always felt great comfort with the ghost, whoever it was. It was then that Carolyn learned about the poltergeist. Almost said poltergeist. Most annoying poltergeist is a poltergeist. So, it was then that Carolyn learned about the poltergeist on Henderson Avenue. Objects were moving by themselves, her aunt admitted, such as things falling from a table and other objects that hadn't been touched. On one occasion, she heard a loud crash downstairs. The house had 3 stories and found a freshly baked pie upside down on the floor. She had placed it far back on the shelf in the pantry. Pots and pans around the pie had not been touched, and no trucks were passing by outside that might account for the vibration that could have caused the pie to fall. There had been nobody else in the house at the time. The aunt, Carol Packer, had never accepted the idea of a ghost, and yet could not offer any explanation for the strange happenings in the house. "Have you had other experiences of a psychic nature?" I asked the young girl. "Nothing really great, only little things such as knowing what my teacher would ask the next day, or what people are wearing when I talk to them on the telephone, or I dream about them. I see things happening, and a week later or so, they do happen." Carolyn and her aunt had looked into the history of the house. They found that 3 families had lived in the house prior to Mrs. Packer's stay, and a woman had even dropped dead on the front porch. They never knew her name or anything else beyond this bare fact. There the matter stood when our little expedition, consisting of Sybil Leek and myself, book editor Evelyn Grippo, and CBS newscaster Lou Adler and his wife, arrived at the Victorian structure where the ghost was presumably awaiting us. Mr. Adler brought along a CBS radio car and an engineer by the name of Leon, who we almost lost on the way over the Verrazano Bridge. It was a humid Sunday evening in May of 1965. 15 people had assembled at the Goetzes to celebrate some kind of anniversary, but I suspect they were very curious about our investigation, as an addition and added attraction. We could hear their voices as we mounted the steep wooden steps leading to the house from Henderson Avenue, the quiet street lined with shade trees. While the CBS people set up their equipment, I politely put the celebrants into the front room and collected those directly concerned with the haunting around a heavy oak table in the dining room on the first floor of the study in the sturdy old house. Carolyn Westbow, her younger sister Betsy, Mr. and Mrs. Goetz, their son, and a married daughter, Mrs. Grippo of Ace Books, the Adlers, and I formed a circle around the table. I had asked Sybil to wait in another room where she could not possibly overhear a single word that was said in the dining room. Afterward, skeptical reporter Lou Adler admitted that unless she had some sort of electronic listening device by which she could listen through walls, or unless you and Sybil set this up to trick everybody, there was no alternative explanation for what occurred this evening. Needless to say, we did not use electronic devices. Sybil could not hear anything, and neither she nor I knew anything of what would happen later. As soon as Sybil Leek was out of earshot, I started to question the witnesses among those present. Carolyn Westbow repeated her testimony given to me earlier. I then turned my attention and my microphone to Betsy Westbow. Betsy had been to the house a number of times. Had she ever felt anything unusual in this house? "One time I walked in here," the serious young girl said in response. "My mother and my cousin were in the kitchen downstairs. In the rear of the house, I walked into the hall. It was dark, about sunset, and I suddenly felt as if someone were staring at me, just looking at me. I was sure it was my cousin, so I asked him to come out. He had played tricks on me before, but he wasn't there, and I went into the kitchen, and he had not left it at all." "Any other experiences bordering on the uncanny?" I asked. This 15-year-old girl was calm and not at all given to flights of imagination, and she struck me as mature beyond her years. "The time my aunt moved out, I was here, too. I felt as if someone were crying, and I wanted to cry with them. I was just walking around then, and it felt as if someone were next to me, crying and saying, "What's going to happen to me?" Betsy had also had psychic experiences in her young life. Not long before, in her family's house, just down the street from this haunted house, her aunt used to call home. Betsy was asleep in bed around 11 p.m. when she awoke with a start. I heard a screech and a dog yelping, as if he had been hurt. I was sure there had been an accident, and we looked out the window, but there was nothing, no car, no dog. What did you do then? We couldn't figure it out, Betsy answered. But the very next evening, again, at 11 o'clock, we heard the same noises. My sister was with me in the front room this time. We checked again, and this time there was a dog. I had seen the entire accident happen exactly as it did 24 hours before. Amazing, I conceded. Then you are indeed clairvoyant. Mrs. Miriam Goetz, a pleasant-looking, vivacious woman in her middle years, had been the lady of the house since February of 1965. She had not seen or heard anything uncanny, and she felt very happy in the house, but then there was strange business about the silver. My silver spoons disappeared, one by one, and we searched and searched, and we thought someone was playing a prank. Each blamed the other, but neither Mr. Goetz, nor my son, nor my young married daughter, Irene Nelson, who lives with us, had hidden the spoons. The wedding gifts were displayed in grandmother's room upstairs, including some pretty silver objects. One evening, after about a week of this, we discovered in each bowl a silver spoon. Of course we thought grandmother had been playing a trick on us, but she assured us she had not. The rest of the spoons turned up in the drawers of the room, carefully hidden in many places. Although the grandmother was quite aged, she was in good mental condition, and the Goetzes really had no proof that she hid the spoons. Irene, my married daughter, had come to sleep with me several nights because she hadn't felt very secure in her own bedroom, Mrs. Goetz added. Mrs. Irene Nelson, a young woman with dark eyes and dark hair, was not the dreamer type, but was rather factually minded and to the point. She had been in the house as long as her parents, 4 months to the time of my investigation. Had she noticed anything unusual? Yes, the young woman said. One night I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 friends of mine, and as we sat there and talked, some screws were falling to the floor from the kitchen table by themselves, one by one. My friends left. I got up to gather my things, and the table collapsed behind me. One of its legs had come off by itself, but the table was not wobbly or any of the screws loose. Just before we used it, or we would have noticed it. There was nobody else in the house who could have loosened the screws as a prank either. And poor grandmother can't be blamed for it either, I added. The octogenarian did not get around very much anymore. Anything else? I asked crisply. One night, about 4 in the morning, Mrs. Nelson said, I woke up with a sudden start, and I opened my eyes and could not close them again. Suddenly, I felt pin prickles all over my body. I felt chilly. I felt there was someone in the room I could not see. I heard a strange sound seemingly outside, as if someone were sweeping the sidewalk. This was in my bedroom directly above the living room. The feeling lasted about 10 minutes, and I just lay there, motionless and frightened. I had several bad nights after that, but that first time was the worst. Have you ever felt another presence when you were alone? Yes, I have, in different parts of the house. The house, along with the building next door, was built in the turn of the century. It was Victorian in architecture and appointments. Heavy wooden beams, many small rooms on the 3 floors, high ceilings, and stolid staircases characterized the house on Henderson Avenue. It was time to bring Sybil Leek into the dining room and start the trance. Had anything happened to her while she was waiting outside the kitchen? Sybil seemed somewhat upset, a very unusual state for this usually imperturbable psychic. I was standing by the refrigerator, she reported, and the kitchen door opened about 2 inches. It disturbed me, for I did not want anyone to think I was opening the door to listen. There was someone there, I felt, and I could have easily gone into trance that moment, but fought it, as I never do this without you being present. Imagine a ghost too impatient to wait for the proper signal. I wanted to run outside, but restrained myself, Sybil added. I never moved from the spot near the refrigerator. I was terrified, which I rarely am. We sat down, and soon Sybil was in a deep trance. Before long, a faint voice made itself heard through Sybil's lips. "What is your name?" I asked. "Anne Meredith." It came with great difficulty of breathing. "Is this your house?" "Yes. I want to get in. I live here. I want to get in." "What's wrong?" "I have heart trouble. I can't get up the steps." Sybil's breathing was heavy and labored. "How long have you lived here?" 35. "What year did you move in?" 22. "Were you alone in this house?" "No." "James?" "These steps. James. Son." "What is it you want?" "I can't stay here. Want to get in. The steps. Can't get to the door. Door must be opened." "How old are you?" 52. "Where did you go to school?" "Nearby, Connecticut." "Your father's name?" "Johannes." "Mother's?" "Marguerite." "Where were you baptized?" "Derby." "My lips are sore. I bite them. I have pain in my heart." I started to explain her true status to her. "You passed out of the physical life in this house," I began. "It is no longer your house. You must go on and join your family, those who have passed on before you. Do you understand?" She did not. "I have to get up the stairs," she mumbled over and over again. As I repeated the formula I usually employ to pry an unhappy ghost away from the place of emotional turmoil in the past, Sybil broke out of trance momentarily, her eyes wide open, staring in sheer terror and lack of understanding at the group. Quickly, I hypnotized her back into the trance state, and in a moment or two, the ghost was back under control of Sybil's voice apparatus. Heavy tears now rolled down the medium's cheeks. Obviously, she was undergoing a great emotional strain. On that note, boys and girls, we do have to go to our first music break, and we have a pretty good one, I must say. Let me get over here to Sprika. That's where my list is. So we have Griff from Toronto, Canada, with Let Freedom Ring. We also have Chico, I believe he's from Milwaukee, with Last Forever. Prime example, with Roy Washington as one of the members of this group, with Power Play. We also have Roy Washington singing Subliminal. And then Chico with Juice. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break. I love this song. It's so great.
Okay, yo, here's the scoop. You can still be a slave, you're whipped and looped, and that's the truth. Got big houses, nice cars, that's real cute, but it doesn't mean nothing, you ain't free to choose. When I say free to choose, no alarm clock, don't gotta hit the snooze. The world is backwards, I'm so confused. They say freedom of speech, but when you speak your mind, they blow a fuse. Just being honest, common sense and common, it's kind of ironic. My freedom, I recently bought it, now I'm a target. If I do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing, come on, man, let freedom ring. Yeah. states become divided states. The world is filled with all kinds of shades, and still resegregate. Parents separate from the children, that's not okay. We should be free to laugh and play. Do it now, before you pass away. Fight for what's right, enough for everybody to get a piece of the pie. Brainwash, social media, full of lies. Go to work, pay bills, then you die. Need a breakaway, guns, get rid of the AKs. Our ancestors paved way since the slave days, but we still hurting. Carry that burden, stop playing victim, beat the system. Love is love, it should be shown. Can't grow unless you leave your comfort zone. This I know, I learned all this from the mentorship. Kids don't know what independent is. Take advantage what your parents did. Go against the grid, you have to. Like going to the bathroom, learn the right songs. Cause of Matthew, liberty like statue. They call now the present, cause it's a gift. It should be cherished, last name fearless, not Harris. All thanks to my parents' parents. Now, love the last name every time that I hear it, cause I know what it represents. Climb the fence, so now I got freedom. Such a beautiful thing. Freedom. Such a wonderful thing. Freedom. Such a beautiful thing. Freedom. Such a wonderful thing.
Never lasts forever. of life going crazy, because I tried everything under my hat, and I found all my plans were tears in the whack. I need a hero, a real life camaraderie, to step in, receive me, and deliver a power play. Something to raise my head from the dust. It's the must. I find someone in whom I can trust. I must grow in knowledge, live what I learn. I'm so glad to meet you, yo, my name is Vern. Lead me any way that you would, and I'll share. I need your power play. It's so good to be clothed in your right mind. Dreams to the front and all past behind. Memories of things you did so absurd. Came to the curb, now heard the word. Cause often we're low now, problems may grind us, but with power from God, yeah, we all stay victorious. Listen to the seed, the knowledge, and digest the rhythm, because a trooper like Jay keeps it righteous. And express a prime example of a vocalist, adjust your bubble. Leroy is like dangerous trouble. Trouble if you want it, peace if you with it. Never before known of a man who can stand it, but so irrelevant. So kick it in if you will, Lord. And I shall. I need your power play. Yeah. Here comes another one. Power for the knowledge, and now you're non-guessing. When power meets the darkness, the devil's got to go. That's my Weasel, and now he's going loco. If you got a problem, God can solve it. Power from the general, and you're in his outfit. Why must the fist stay dirty so filthy? Get off your rear and whitewash the pickings. Power for cleansing, power for sanitizing, power for us, power for the rising of the sun. Cause in your darkest hour, you can look up and express to feel the power up. I need your power play. Yeah. Comes another one.
money back. Ate up. I think I got juice. I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you figure? I think I'm the I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you figure?
Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip.
Juice. Handmade, get bucks for me. Drop the soda can, she got a crush on me. Little mama so in love with me. Even taught, look up to me.
Look, but it never mattered. Got these haters pissed. I control their bladder, come across it. It's a chance to scatter. Henny on the house like a fucking ladder. See your main. Yes, I had to back her. She was being extra up and coming active. Beat it out the frame. I let the glass shatter. Beat it out the frame. And leave a flabbergasted.
I think I got juice. I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you figure? I think I'm the I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you figure?
Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. the high five. Johnny Gill, my. Bad chicks, my type. Pull up like Huggies, they mug. Pull up like Huggies, they love me. Pull up like Huggies, cause I'm the shit. MC Hammer can't touch. Off that fifth hen like I slice a chicken. I was racist. I'm a mathematician. Call me Michael Bibbins. I'm a new addition, not a Buddhist. Don't wear true religion. Yeah, I spit a lot. Like my tooth is missing. And she gave me. Now her roof is missing. I'm the bomb, baby. Now the proof is ticking. Be calm, baby. We in a new dimension.
I think I got juice. I think I'm that hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you feel? I think I'm the I think I'm the hitter. They say I'm the man. I say, how do you feel? Turn up.
Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip. Don't let drip, don't let drip, don't let drip.
Juice.
Yeah. Come on.
I see you, Roy Washington, man. What's happening, man?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. They never say it in words, but in deeds wars declared. Justice is gone and the sight's none is spare. Especially the kingdom encased in melanin. But these suckers are weak, kings and queens will ride again. Come on. Slackers with badges, the white sheets and the maggots. Watch them fall as I tag them because I'm better than average. A sharpshooter with words with my eye to the scope. And they escape when I don the black cape? Is hell no. I'm a ninja for right, who can vanish from sight. Pick you off in the night, but still the Lord is my light. Perceiving all you see, the truth behind the scenes. Instead of jumping bandwagons, the light says believe in me. Cause you're a puppet, no doubt. 45th turned you out. Though I saw your lips moving, no sound came out. So I was sent from the heavenlies, born so you could find me. Swam the scene and stream, took flight during the 90s. Landed in grace, wrote a verse of hip hop. Got with Jay and found the taste was smooth as butterscotch. We had hood love and money. Problems, they be on me, but we stayed in the flow. It had juice like Manolo.
They can try to oppress, you can try to impress. I'm just after success, none less, you can look in my eyes, you can feel in my vibes. King down inside and it's so subliminal.
God on my side, I ain't worried about none. If it ain't about money, then it ain't about none. Laughing at my enemies, I know they see me coming. If it ain't subliminal, they can't even see me.
Politics and violent shit. I'm here to raise the consciousness for every face and race up in this nation trapped in poverty. Diamond in the rough, need to cut, shape it and polish it. Bad thoughts cripple life, we can be an optimist. We can be an optimist, reconstruct apocalypse. Broke people always hating, mix me with that gossiping. Rose up in the concrete, rain and sun, I'm blossoming. My people need to be like kind of Velcro, then we conquer it. They can try to oppress, you can try to impress. I'm just after success, none less. You can look in my eyes, you can feel in my vibes. King down inside and it's so subliminal.
God on my side, I ain't worried about none. If it ain't about money, then it ain't about none. Laughing at my enemies, I know they see me coming. If it ain't subliminal, they can't even see me coming.
The 45th is a joke, and he's weak in disgust. He plans to divide, but there's no stopping us. If we have to fight, go toe to toe for our lives, we prevail and got sight, cause only light I recite. I blow my lyrics like a shotgun, camouflaged inside the tracks. Now watch the suckers run. I'm moving fast enough, heads up, now here I come. I designed 50 ways to make this murder fun. I spit the lyrical rain that coat the concrete, that give life and take form. Arise and walk the street. Am I the greatest to spit? Feel the spray and we'll see. Let it dry, all the lies and the truth will point to me. Even when surrounded by a million MCs, I'm the one under the sun who's the greatest of these. I got the Holy Ghost juking and tapping while I'm rapping. Sticking and moving like Roy Jones, I'll make it happen. Even animals move when the novelist is rocking. My doggy started barking, his ears just a-flopping. Subliminally, I penetrate camps like an enemy. Flicking the lights, cancel sight, cause you're not seeing me.
They can try to oppress, you can try to impress. I'm just after success, none less. You can look in my eyes, you can feel in my vibes. Live a king down inside and it's so subliminal.
God on my side, I ain't worried about none. If it ain't about money, then it ain't about none. Laughing at my enemies, I know they see me coming. If it ain't subliminal, they can't even see me coming.
So we're going to continue with this story. Go over here and turn down this track a little. Gotta turn it down a smidge. It's a bit robust. Even 56. Come on. Yeah, there we go. Very nice. I hope you guys enjoyed that music break. It was wonderful. I was able to mambo dog face to the banana patch. It was great. Alright, here we go. I want to come in. I have to come back. You died on the steps of this house. You can't come back, I countered. Someone's there, the ghost insisted in a shaky voice. I have to come back. Who is it you want to come back to? James. I assured her James was well taken care of and she need not worry about him anymore. Don't leave me outside, I shall die, she said now. You have died. Who had owned both, who lived in the one next door, had come and gone in the old house atop the hill, in churches and cemeteries. Bowery family had adopted the name Peter Stuyvesant, the Episcopalian, to the Reverend Richard E. Queried about his peculiar rector of his 26 years. Nobody was supposed to church at that time, as called to be in supernormal. I've never heard that term. Supernormal. Coal scraps were though nearby. At that time, she was sure the place was haunted. It's not. I brought the dog. Work with me, people. Work with in for a reason. Come on. Number 22. Novelist and shit. That dog is bugging me. Dashing across the street, he found the painting. Had indeed. When insisted all that Lafarge could not find rest until he had ways that approaching their studios that a light was on and the door open, although they distinctly they noted and had never in common at the turn of the century, but seen a picture of him. The ball dressers and apparently the opening his injured wrist, he realized that his visitors had dissolved into thin air. There was no one in the dark room. The door really locked. This was still secure. Maxwell and his roommate saw nothing there. Gaining guessably that Mrs. Belk also brought along her pet Chihuahua, which proved to be somewhat. Mrs. Meyer started to enter the trance state, almost hair hooked in an odd, mean face, cleft chin, light tan coat, nose, and half to fill out that of the medium's control. 90s, early 90s. After a while, the medium's 1900s tell us what he was looking for. There were additional requests for us to get out of his house. Finally, the ghost pointed the looking for. It was getting 1856 she lied, and is a copy of a similar studio